She poisoned my husband. The scream slices through the golden ballroom as crystal lights shimmer over Billionaire's gala-turned crime scene. On the marble floor, an old man in a wheelchair is convulsing, foam gathering at his lips, while a young maid in a stained uniform is dragged backward, wrists twisted, her eyes begging anyone to believe she is innocent. Guests recoil, diamonds flashing, champagne spilling like blood. At the edge of the chaos, a quiet janitor stands half-hidden behind a curtain, head bowed, one hand gripping a dripping mop, the other clenched around a small metal drive in his pocket. His gaze never leaves the maid, burning with something like betrayal, something like pain, something far too intense for nobody. Why does the lowest man in the room look like he's the only one who can stop this? And what truth is he terrified to reveal? What happened next shocked everyone and set off a chain of events no one saw coming. Stay with me, this is a story you need to hear. Before we start the story, comment below and let us know where in the world you're watching from today. And if you find this story impactful, don't forget to subscribe for more. The crystal chandelier shattered the ballroom into 1,000 prisms of light as Sophia's wrist was wrenched behind her back. Around her, silk gowns rustled away in horror, champagne flutes frozen mid-toast, as two security guards dragged her across the marble floor still slick with spilled wine. Murderer, Lydia's voice cut through the shocked silence, her diamond necklace catching the light as she pointed an accusing finger. She poisoned him, my husband, he drank from her tray and now look at him. Behind Lydia, the patriarch convulsed in his wheelchair, foam gathering at the corners of his mouth while a doctor shouted for space. Sophia's eyes were wild with terror and incomprehension, her maid's uniform twisted as she struggled. I would never, please, someone help him. Her voice cracked, echoing off the vaulted ceiling where painted angels seemed to look away. In the corner, half hidden by velvet curtains and overlooked by the chaos, stood a man in a janitor's uniform. His knuckles were white around a mop handle, his other hand clutching something small and metallic in his pocket, a USB drive that felt suddenly heavy as a stone. Lucas Morty, heir to the very fortune being celebrated tonight, stared at Sophia with eyes that held equal parts anguish and fury, watching the woman he'd almost trusted being dragged toward her ruin. His jaw tightened as he took one step forward, then stopped, paralyzed between revelation and silence, while behind him Victor, the CFO with the calculating smile, whispered something into a phone and the ballroom doors slammed shut. The question hung in that frozen moment like smoke. Would he speak now, or let the woman he'd been falling for be destroyed by a lie he wasn't yet certain was a lie? What unfolds next will shatter everything you think you know about loyalty and deception. Before we dive deeper, hit that subscribe button. This story is just beginning, and you won't want to miss what's hidden beneath the surface. 6 weeks earlier, Lucas Morty had walked through an airport terminal wearing a face no one would recognize, not because he'd changed, but because no one ever really looked at him before. He'd spent 3 years building schools in East Africa, deliberately far from the marble and money world of his father's empire, and he'd told himself he was done with all of it. The call from his father's lawyer, Gregory Chen, had been brief and strange. Your father had a stroke. Come home, but Lucas, come quietly. The warning made no sense until Lucas approached his own childhood home and saw it transformed. Armed guards at the gate, who'd once waved him through, now checked credentials with military precision. The fountain in the circular drive, his mother's favorite, with the laughing dolphins, had been replaced by something severe and modern, all black stone and sharp angles. And moving through the tall windows of what used to be his father's study was a woman Lucas had met exactly once, at his father's hasty wedding 2 years ago. Lydia, 38 years old, sleek as a knife, now apparently the mistress of everything. Gregory met him at a cafe 3 miles from the estate, looking over his shoulder as though the espresso machine might be listening. Your father's alive but barely conscious, Gregory said, sliding a folder across the scarred table. The doctors call it a massive stroke. I call it convenient timing. The day after he told me he was planning to restructure the company and investigated some irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The kind that involves $7 million moving through shell companies I can't trace, contracts signed with a signature that looks like your father's but isn't quite right, and staff members who suddenly quit or disappear when they ask too many questions. Gregory's voice dropped. And Lydia now has a medical power of attorney. Victor Chen, no relation to me, thank God, he's the new CFO, and he's locked down every financial record tighter than a Swiss vault. Lucas felt cold despite the cafe's warmth. You think they did this to him? I think if you walk in there as Lucas Morty, billionaire heir with questions, you'll get smiles and fake documents and maybe an accident of your own. Gregory pulled out a second envelope. But if you walk in as nobody, you might see the truth. The employment agency was surprised how quickly their new cleaning position at the Morty estate was filled. The background check for Luka Kovac came back clean. Gregory had seen to that. And 3 days later, Lucas found himself standing at the servants' entrance of his own home, wearing second-hand work clothes that smelled of industrial detergent, and carrying a bucket of supplies he didn't know how to use. The transformation was immediate and brutal. Lucas had always known there were staff. His childhood was filled with kind faces bringing meals, tidying rooms, driving him to school, but he'd never understood the vast, invisible infrastructure that kept the mansion breathing. Now he was part of it, and he was shocked by its cruelty. Mrs. Dalton, the head housekeeper, ruled the below-stairs world like a general, her voice sharp as breaking glass. You're late. Janitors use the back hall, never the main stairs, and if a family member or guest sees you, you make yourself invisible. Is that clear? Yes, ma'am. And you'll empty bins, scrub floors, and do whatever else I assign. The Morty estate doesn't tolerate laziness. Her eyes were hard. We had to let go of 3 maids last month for theft and insubordination. Don't make me regret hiring you. Lucas soon learned that theft meant being accused of theft, and insubordination meant questioning why budgets were cut, while Lydia bought a 3rd sports car. He worked silently, mopping halls he used to run through as a boy, and he watched. Lydia moved through the mansion like a beautiful storm, all designer suits and cold efficiency. Her assistant always 2 steps behind with tablets and itineraries. She never looked at the staff, just through them, and when she gave orders, they came out like ultimatums. Tell the cook I want Arctic char tonight, not salmon. If he can't manage that, find someone who can. The fact that Arctic char wasn't available within 200 miles didn't matter. Someone would suffer for the impossibility. Victor was worse in his own way, quiet, smiling, always with a folder under his arm and calculations behind his eyes. Lucas watched him corner the head gardener one morning, speaking too softly to hear, but the old man's face went grey, and by afternoon, he'd tendered his resignation. When Lucas asked another worker what happened, the answer came in a whisper. Victor found some old tax mistake from 10 years ago, said he'd report it unless Carlos left without fuss. It was a pattern, pressure, silence, disappearance. But then Lucas noticed her. Sophia Reyes was 26, small-framed but sturdy, with dark hair pulled into a practical bun and eyes that reminded Lucas of his mother's, not in color, but in the quality of attention they held. She'd been assigned to the patriarch's wing, the sealed-off section where Lucas's father lay in a medicalized bedroom, attended by rotating nurses, and apparently, Sophia for the personal care that nurses considered beneath them. Lucas engineered reasons to clean near that wing. He saw Sophia emerging with laundry, speaking gently to one of the nurses about adjusting his father's pillow to ease breathing. He saw her slipping into the room during her lunch break to read aloud from a book, his father's favorite Steinbeck novel, which somehow she'd known or discovered. And he saw her with Emma. Emma was Lucas's half-sister, the shy 11-year-old product of his father's brief, failed second marriage. She'd always been a shadow in the house, overlooked and anxious, but now with their father incapacitated and Lydia in control, she was nearly a ghost. Lucas watched Sophia find the girl crying in the library one afternoon, and instead of hurrying past the way every other servant did, terrified of being accused of bothering the family, Sophia sat down. What's wrong, Pequeña? Nobody listens, Emma said, so quietly Lucas almost missed it from his position pretending to clean baseboards. I told them Daddy's medicine smells wrong now, different. But they say I'm imagining things, and Lydia says I shouldn't be in his room bothering the nurses. Sophia's face went very still. What do you mean, wrong? It used to smell like peppermint. Now it's bitter like burnt plastic. Have you told the doctors? Lydia chose the doctors. They don't listen to me either. Sophia reached out and took the girl's hand, a gesture so tender and risky that Lucas felt something crack inside his chest. In this house, kindness was a liability. Care was punished. Yet here was this woman offering both. I'll pay attention, Sophia promised. And Emma, you're not imagining things, trust yourself. Lucas, crouched by his bucket of cleaning supplies in his dead mother's library, felt his cynicism, the armor he'd built over years of watching his father choose money over meaning, begin to fall away. Maybe Gregory was right. Maybe the truth was still here, hidden under layers of corruption. And maybe it wore a maid's uniform and had eyes that saw what everyone else ignored. He didn't know yet that he was already half in love with her. He didn't know yet that she'd been chosen for destruction from the very beginning. The first attack came on a Thursday afternoon during one of Lydia's carefully orchestrated social events, a garden luncheon for the wives of board members, where champagne flowed and business was conducted in the language of compliments and veiled threats. Lucas was trimming hedges with the garden crew, close enough to hear laughter and the clink of silverware, when Lydia's voice rose above the others. I'm sorry, I must interrupt for just a moment. Her tone was gracious concern. There's been a small incident. The conversations died. Lucas edged closer, shears forgotten. Lydia stood beside Sophia, who'd been serving tea, one elegant hand resting on the maid's shoulder like a trap. Sophia, darling, I hate to do this publicly, but I'm afraid I must. My diamond bracelet, the Cartier piece, you all know it, has gone missing from my bedroom. You were the only one who cleaned there this morning. Sophia's face was drained of color. Mrs. Morty, I didn't take anything. I would never. Of course not intentionally, I'm sure. Perhaps you simply admired it, slipped it into your pocket to look at, and forgot. Lydia's voice was honey over steel. It happens. Just return it, and we'll say no more. I don't have it. Sophia's voice shook but held firm. Please, you can search my things. Oh, I already have. Lydia gestured, and Mrs. Dalton emerged from the house wheeling Sophia's cleaning cart. The housekeeper's face was carved from stone as she lifted the top tray, reached underneath, and pulled out a glittering bracelet. The gasps from the luncheon guests were a chorus of condemnation. Sophia swayed as if struck. That's not, I didn't put that there. Someone planted it. I've been out here with all of you for 20 minutes. Really, dear, this is embarrassing. Lydia turned to her guests with an expression of pained tolerance. I try to give opportunities to girls from difficult backgrounds, but sometimes, check the cameras, Lucas blurted before he could stop himself. Every head turned. For a terrible moment, he thought he'd exposed himself, but no, he was just the janitor, and servants weren't supposed to speak. Mrs. Dalton's glare could have melted iron, but Emma, bless her, picked up the thread. Yes, the security cameras, they cover the hallways, they'd show if Sophia went back inside. Lydia's smile tightened. Emma, this isn't your concern, please, Sophia said, meeting the stepmother's eyes with something like quiet defiance. If there are cameras, they'll prove I didn't leave the garden. For a long moment, Lucas thought Lydia would refuse. Then one of the bored wives, old money, sharp eyes, said, it would settle the matter cleanly, Lydia dear. Trapped by her own social performance, Lydia gestured to a guard. The weight was excruciating. Lucas watched Sophia standing alone, shunned by the other staff who'd learned not to associate with the accused, while the garden party tried to resume its false gaiety. When the guard returned, his face was carefully neutral. Ma'am, the footage shows Miss Reyes exiting the service door at 11:47 and remaining in the garden area continuously. She didn't return inside until now. The air changed. Accusations hung unspoken. If Sophia didn't go back in, who put the bracelet in her cart? Lydia recovered with the grace of a practiced performer. Well, an unfortunate misunderstanding, then. Perhaps one of the other girls moved it by accident. Sophia dear, I apologize for the confusion. Let's all return to our lovely afternoon." But as the guests murmured and Sophia was dismissed with a curt nod, Lucas saw the look Lydia exchanged with Victor, who'd been watching from the terrace. It wasn't a defeat, it was a recalculation. The real blow would come later. 3 days passed. Lucas continued his invisible work, noting everything: Victor's late-night meetings with the family accountant, Lydia's habit of locking her study even when she was inside it, the way the nursing staff changed every week, never the same people long enough to notice patterns. He copied schedules, photographed documents left briefly unattended, and built his case brick by brick. But he also watched Sophia. She moved through her work with a kind of defiant grace now, aware she was marked but refusing to cower. She still read to his father when she thought no one was looking. She still found time to help Emma with homework in stolen moments. And once, late at night, when Lucas was mopping the upper hall, she emerged from the patriarch's room looking troubled. "Is something wrong?" he asked, then remembered servants didn't question other servants about family matters, but Sophia seemed too preoccupied to care about protocol. His medication schedule changed today. New prescriptions, new dosages. The nurse said it was the doctor's orders, but she shook her head. "I'm probably being paranoid. It's just, ever since Emma mentioned that smell, trust your instincts," Lucas said quietly. She looked at him then, really looked, and for a moment he thought she saw through his disguise to the man beneath. But then footsteps echoed from the stairs, Victor, ascending with that easy predator's smile. "Sophia, still here. It's past your shift. Just finishing, sir." She hurried past with her cleaning caddy, not meeting his eyes. Victor watched her go, then turned that smile on Lucas. "And you, Luca, isn't it? You're very dedicated." "Mopping at midnight. Just thorough, sir." "Thorough, yes." Victor stepped closer, and Lucas caught the scent of expensive cologne and something underneath it, something chemical and wrong. Thorough is good, but curiosity isn't. In this house, people who pay too much attention to things that aren't their business tend to have short careers. You understand? "Yes, sir." "Good." Victor patted his shoulder with a hand that felt like a threat, then continued up to Lydia's quarters. Lucas stood alone in the dimly lit hallway, his heart pounding, and knew the endgame was approaching. Whatever they were planning, it was accelerating. He didn't know he was already too late to prevent the next phase. The following morning, Lucas arrived early to find the mansion in barely controlled chaos. An ambulance had been called in the night, not for the patriarch, but because of the patriarch. Apparently, he'd been found dangerously close to the top of the main staircase in his wheelchair, teetering on the edge, saved only because a night guard heard a noise and investigated. The official story, delivered by Mrs. Dalton to the assembled staff with funeral solemnity, was that someone had left the patriarch unattended and improperly positioned. An investigation was underway. By noon, that investigation had concluded. Lucas was cleaning windows in an adjoining room when he heard the confrontation. "This is your signature on the care log." Victor's voice, cold and precise. "You signed out at midnight, stating the patriarch was secure in his bed. Yet at 2 a.m. he was found in his wheelchair at the top of the stairs. How do you explain that?" I did put him to bed. I always do. Someone must have moved him after I left." Sophia's voice was steady, but Lucas heard the undercurrent of fear. "Are you suggesting the nursing staff are lying?" Lydia, jumping in. "Dr. Morrison here has reviewed their reports. All of them state they were attending to other matters, as the patriarch was supposed to be in Sophia's care until morning. But that's not the protocol. The night nurse is supposed to check every 2 hours. The protocol changed last week," Victor interrupted. "Per your own suggestion, documented here, requesting more autonomy in overnight care to reduce disturbance to the patient. Are you now saying you're unable to handle the responsibility you requested?" Lucas's blood ran cold. He edged closer to the door, risking a glance. Sophia stood in the center of the patriarch's room, surrounded by Lydia, Victor, Dr. Morrison, a thin man with nervous hands, and Mrs. Dalton. On the side table lay a stack of papers that Lucas recognized as care logs, and on top, what looked like an incident report. "I never requested that," Sophia said, but her voice had lost its certainty. Victor held up a sheet of paper. Your signature, your handwriting. Even from his angle, Lucas could see Sophia's face go slack with disbelief. She'd been forged, framed with her own hand. The bracelet had been practiced. This was the real performance. The patriarch could have died, Lydia said, and now her voice carried the weight of moral outrage, pitched perfectly for the doctor and housekeeper to carry beyond this room. Brain damage from a fall at his age and condition would be catastrophic. Whether through negligence or malice. Malice, Sophia's voice cracked. I love him, I take care of him, I would never. Love doesn't pay overdue rent, does it? Victor said softly. I know about your brother, Sophia, the medical bills. The desperation. Perhaps someone offered you money to look the other way. To be certain, accidents occur. It was a masterpiece of character assassination. Lucas watched, frozen by the need to maintain his cover and the agony of watching someone innocent be destroyed, as Sophia's denials became incoherent, as Dr. Morrison's face closed with professional disapproval, as Mrs. Dalton shook her head with grim vindication. I think it's best if you leave immediately, Lydia said, her voice dripping with false regret. Dr. Morrison will file his report with the Senior Care Oversight Board. You won't work in this field again, Sophia. And you should be grateful we're not pursuing criminal charges. Please, Sophia whispered. I have a brother. He needs. You should have thought of that before you endangered my husband. 2 security guards appeared at the door. The same ones who would, weeks later, drag her across a ballroom floor. They took Sophia by the arms, not roughly, but firmly, inexorably, and walked her toward the servants' entrance while she kept repeating that it wasn't true, that someone was lying, that she'd never hurt anyone. Lucas stood by his window with his spray bottle and cloth, wearing the face of a janitor who'd seen nothing unusual, while inside him something howled with rage and guilt. Emma appeared in the hallway, her face streaked with tears. They're lying. Sophia didn't do anything wrong. Emma, go to your room. Lydia's voice was ice. This doesn't concern you. But I saw. Now, Emma. The little girl fled, sobbing. And Sophia was marched past Lucas without seeing him, without seeing anything, her eyes devastated and lost. The door closed behind her. The mansion settled back into its routine. And Lucas, still holding his cleaning supplies, felt the full weight of his choice to remain hidden. He could have revealed himself right then, could have used his name and power to stop this. But he had no proof yet, nothing concrete that would hold up against Lydia and Victor's prepared documentation and bought witnesses. So he let her go. He told himself it was strategy, patience, the long game. But late that night, alone in the small room above the garage that came with his janitor position, Lucas admitted the truth. He was afraid. Afraid that if he exposed himself too soon, they'd destroy the evidence and disappear. Afraid that his father would die before justice came. And afraid, in a way that shamed him, that the comfortable weapon of his disguise would be taken away, and he'd have to face his own failure to protect his father as himself, as the son who'd run away rather than stay and fight. He fell asleep, clutching the USB drive Gregory had given him, still mostly empty, and dreamed of Sophia's eyes asking him why he'd said nothing. Sophia's apartment was located in a part of the city the Morty family's drivers carefully avoided, a neighborhood where the streetlights worked intermittently, where graffiti covered graffiti in layers of old rage, and where the smell of cooking mixed with exhaust fumes and desperation. The building was 5 stories of water-stained concrete and broken intercoms, the kind of place where you learned not to make eye contact in the stairwell. 3rd floor, Unit 3F. Sophia fumbled with her keys, hands still shaking from the bus ride home, and pushed open the door to find Matteo on the couch, oxygen tube in his nose, controller in his hands, and concern written across his thin 17-year-old face. You're home early, he said, then saw her expression. Sophie, what happened? She tried to answer, but couldn't find words that made sense. How could she explain being accused of trying to kill a man she'd been trying to save? How could she tell Matteo, whose medications cost $800 a month, even with the cheap insurance, whose specialists were booked 6 months out, who'd already sacrificed his childhood to her mistakes, that she'd lost the job that kept them afloat? So she just sank onto the couch beside him and let him hold her while she cried, and he didn't ask again. That was Matteo's gift, patience learned from years of hospitals and waiting rooms. Later, when she could speak, she gave him the sanitized version. A misunderstanding, a rich family's politics, a job that hadn't worked out. She didn't mention the accusations or the blacklist or the way Victor had smiled when he said she'd never work in care again. "We'll be okay," Matteo said, with the false optimism of someone who'd spent half his life trying to be less of a burden. "You'll find something else." Sophia looked around their apartment, 2 rooms and a bathroom, windows that didn't quite close, a refrigerator that held half a carton of eggs, wilted lettuce, and $17 worth of groceries she'd stretched across 4 days. Their mother's medical debt, from the cancer that killed her 2 years ago, still appeared on collection notices that Sophia hid from Matteo. The rent was due in 6 days, and she was $300 short even before losing this job. "Yeah," she said, "something else." But something else didn't materialize. Sophia spent the next week drowning in applications and rejections. The agencies she'd worked with before wouldn't return her calls. Lydia's reach was long, her social network wide. And somewhere in the invisible infrastructure of the wealthy, the word had been passed. Sophia Reyes was unsuitable, dangerous, even. Private families looking for caregivers would start interviews warmly, then check references, and suddenly remember the position was filled. The hospital, where she'd volunteered during nursing school, told her politely that they had no openings. Even the cleaning companies she'd worked for in college said they weren't hiring, though she could see the help wanted signs in their windows. She was being erased from the economy of decent work. So she took the work that was left, the night shift at a budget motel by the highway, scrubbing bathrooms tourists had wrecked and changing sheets that smelled of cigarettes and loneliness. 6 hours, 4 nights a week, $10 an hour, cash under the table because the owner didn't want to deal with paperwork. It wasn't enough. She sold her mother's wedding ring, the one thing she'd promised herself she'd never sell, to a pawn shop that gave her $200 for something worth 10 times that. She sold her own laptop, her winter coat, and a box of books she'd loved. She picked up extra hours babysitting for neighbors who paid in 10s and 5s, watching their children while working double shifts as a waitress at a diner that asked no questions. Still not enough. Matteo's medication came in brown bottles that rattled like accusations. The insurance company sent letters about coverage limits and prior authorizations. The electric company sent a disconnection warning. And every night, Sophia did the math that never quite added up, sitting at their tiny kitchen table with a calculator and a prayer while Matteo pretended to sleep in the next room. But even in the grinding poverty of those weeks, Sophia couldn't quite kill her own nature. Mrs. Chen in 3E, elderly, alone, living on a pension that barely covered her own rent, knocked on Sophia's door one evening looking sheepish. "I'm sorry to bother you, dear, but my daughter was supposed to send money and it hasn't come, and I have no food until." Sophia opened her refrigerator, took out the leftover rice and chicken she'd planned to stretch across 3 meals, and gave it away with a smile that said it was nothing. "We made too much," she lied. "Please, save me from eating the same thing again." Later, walking to her motel shift at 11 p.m., she stopped at a street food cart where Miss Rosa, 70 years old, Salvadoran, working to send money to grandchildren she hadn't seen in a decade, served pupusas and coffee to night workers. "You look tired, Mija," Rosa said, sliding a coffee across without asking for payment. "I'm fine, you're lying, but you're proud, so I respect it." Rosa ladled beans into a takeout container, added pupusas, and handed it over. "Eat, and tell me the truth, are you fine?" Something in the old woman's eyes, or maybe just the accumulation of exhaustion, broke through Sophia's defenses. "They said I tried to kill someone, a good man, a man I cared about. They lied, and now no one will hire me, and I don't know how to keep my brother alive." Rosa was quiet for a moment, stirring her pot of beans. "You know what my grandmother told me back when I was young and stupid and thought the world was fair? She said, 'Rosa, they can take your job, your money, your house. They can even take your name. But they cannot take who you are unless you let them. You understand? I'm trying to. Try harder. Rosa's voice was firm but kind. Those rich people, they have money and they have power, but they don't have what you have. Character, decency, love. And in the end, Mija, that's the only wealth that matters. Sophia wanted to believe it. She held onto that faith like a rope in a storm as she worked through the night, as she deposited her meager cash into the account that fed Mateo's medical needs, as she ignored her own hunger and fear. And then, on a cold morning 3 weeks after her firing, her phone rang. Sophia, Emma's voice, small and scared, whisper quiet. I'm not supposed to call you. They took your number out of the staff contact list, but I remembered it. Sophia, I miss you, and I'm scared. Emma, what's wrong? Daddy's getting worse. The new nurse is mean and she doesn't talk to him or read to him or anything. And Lydia and Victor are always in his room late at night, and I hear them talking about medicine and numbers, and Sophia, I think something bad is happening. Sophia's heart clenched. She'd thought about the patriarch every day, wondering if anyone was checking his breathing, adjusting his position, monitoring for bed sores or pneumonia. Emma, you need to tell someone, a doctor, or they don't listen to me. No one listens, the girl's voice broke. Can you come back? They won't let me Pequenia, they made sure of that. I hate them, I hate this house. A muffled sob. I wish you were here. I wish everything was different. I even miss Luca. He was nice, for a janitor, and I think he's sad too. Sophia had barely registered the janitor during her last days at the mansion, a quiet man, dark-haired, who'd seemed more observant than most staff but kept to himself. Luca, the cleaner, he helped me once when I dropped all my books, and when they accused you with the bracelet, he's the one who said to check the cameras. Emma sniffled. I think he knew you didn't do it, a janitor who'd spoken up. Sophia filed that away as a small kindness in a cruel place. Emma, listen to me. You're smart and you're strong. Keep watching out for your father. Write down anything strange. And if it gets dangerous, call 911, okay? Don't worry about Lydia's rules. Okay, a pause. Sophia, I love you. I love you too, Pequenia. The call ended. Sophia sat on her crumpled bed in her crumbling apartment, listening to Mateo's labored breathing from the couch, and felt the weight of 2 children she couldn't save and a debt to a dying man she couldn't repay. She didn't know that in a mansion across the city, that quiet janitor was compiling evidence and planning a confrontation that would explode like a grenade. She didn't know that Victor was already setting the trap that would drag her back into hell. She didn't know that the worst was still coming. Victor Chen found Sophia at the diner where she waitressed breakfast shifts, sliding into a booth during the dead hour between breakfast and lunch rush when she was wiping down tables with hands chapped from too much bleach and not enough sleep. Miss Reyes, you're a hard woman to track down. She looked up and her blood turned to ice. How did you? I'm very good at my job. Victor's smile was pleasant and absolutely terrifying. Please sit. We should talk. I have nothing to say to you, but I have something to say to you, and if you walk away, your brother will lose his medical coverage within 48 hours. Sophia's legs went numb. She sat. Victor pulled out a folder. He always had folders, she remembered, like a magician with endless pockets, and laid several pages on the chipped formica table. 2 years ago, when your mother was dying and Mateo needed emergency treatment for his respiratory crisis, you filled out insurance documents. Do you remember? She remembered. The hospital, the forms, the clerk telling her that without proof of continuous coverage Mateo's procedures wouldn't be covered, and they'd be billed $70,000 they didn't have. She remembered her mother dying in one room while Mateo fought for breath in another, and the desperation that made her check a box marked prior coverage when there had been a 3-month gap in their insurance. That's insurance fraud, Sophia. A felony, 3 to 5 years in prison, the diner blurred. It was a mistake. He was dying and I know, I don't care if it was a mistake or desperation or love. I care that I have documentation here. He tapped the folder. That proves it. And I have contacts at the State Insurance Fraud Division who would be very interested in this case, especially with your recent history of elder abuse allegations. Those were lies, were they? Can you prove it? Because I can prove this. Victor leaned back, letting his words settle like poison. But here's the good news, Sophia. I'm not interested in destroying you. I'm interested in a mutually beneficial arrangement. She couldn't speak, could barely breathe. The Morty patriarch requires around-the-clock care, and Emma has become difficult. She trusts you. Lydia has agreed, reluctantly, to give you a second chance. Night shift only. Reduced salary, of course, given your history, and some small administrative help, signing paperwork, recording medication notes, that sort of thing. Very simple. Administrative help, Sophia repeated hollowly. Just your signature on some care documents. Boring stuff. Medication schedules, treatment authorizations, expense reports. Nothing that would harm anyone. His voice dropped. And in return, I make this insurance matter disappear. Matteo keeps his coverage. You keep your freedom. Everyone wins. And if I refuse... Victor gathered his papers with meticulous care. Then I make a phone call, and by this time tomorrow, you're arrested. Matteo loses his insurance immediately. Family members of felons aren't eligible for the plan you're on. He'll be removed from the transplant wait list. And you'll watch all of that happen from a jail cell where you'll have years to contemplate your choices. He stood, dropping a business card on the table. Report to the mansion tomorrow at 8 p.m., the service entrance. Mrs. Dalton will have your new contract. Why? Sophia whispered. Why me? Victor paused, and for just a moment she saw something behind his corporate mask. Not cruelty, exactly, but a complete absence of empathy, the hollowness of a man who saw people as tools. Because you're desperate, you're competent, and you have excellent handwriting. Also, because you love your brother more than you love yourself, which makes you predictable. Are we clear? She nodded, a tiny motion that felt like signing away her soul. Good, Victor's smile returned. Welcome back to the Morty family, Sophia. I think you'll find this arrangement very educational. He left her sitting in the empty diner, the business card on the table like a small white gravestone. That night, Sophia held Matteo while he slept, listening to the wheezing rhythm of his breathing, and made a bargain with a god she wasn't sure existed. Let me protect him. Let me keep him alive. Whatever it costs me, let him live. She'd sign any paper, tell any lie, commit any small evil if it meant her little brother got to see 18, 20, 30. She told herself she'd find a way to resist, to sabotage whatever they were planning. She told herself she was still a good person. But when she reported to the service entrance at 8 p.m. the next evening, when Mrs. Dalton handed her a contract with a salary 30% lower than before, and a clause about discretionary administrative duties. When Victor appeared in the patriarch's room at midnight with the first stack of papers that needed her signature, Sophia signed. And signed, and signed. Lucas watched Sophia's return with an emotion he couldn't name, relief that she was here, close enough to watch over, confusion about why they'd brought back someone they'd so publicly destroyed. And underneath it all, a gnawing suspicion that began as an itch and grew into a wound. He'd spent the weeks of her absence building his case methodically. He'd planted miniature cameras, the kind Gregory had sourced from intelligence suppliers, in 3 strategic locations. One hidden in the crown molding of his father's room, one in the bookshelf of Lydia's study, one in the air vent of Victor's temporary office. He'd hacked Victor's laptop during a late-night cleaning shift, copying files onto encrypted drives. And he'd traced the shell companies, following digital breadcrumbs through tax havens and fake addresses until he could see the shape of it. A systematic looting of Morty holdings, disguised as medical expenses, charitable donations, and facility upgrades. 7 million have already been stolen. Another 15 million were ready to transfer the moment his father's death or permanent incapacitation was confirmed, but he needed proof of the endgame. He needed to catch them in the act of the crime that would justify the theft, the justifiable death of an elderly, sick man that would let Lydia inherit as the grieving widow, that would let Victor be retained as the trusted CFO who'd guided the company through tragedy. He needed to know how they planned to kill his father. Then Sophia returned, and the surveillance footage began telling a story that shattered him. The first night, he watched her arrive at the patriarch's room looking smaller than he remembered, wary as a beaten dog. The night nurse left her alone with his father, and a stack of what looked like care logs. 20 minutes later, Victor appeared. Lucas, reviewing the footage later in the privacy of his garage room, leaned closer to the screen. "Just some medication notes," Victor was saying, placing papers in front of Sophia. "The doctors have changed his prescriptions again, very technical stuff. I need you to copy these adjustments into the official log in your handwriting so they match the earlier entries. Regulatory compliance, you understand. Shouldn't the nurses do this? The nurses don't have your familiarity with his care history." "And Sophia," Victor's voice dropped, "remember our agreement. These are just medical notes. Nothing harmful, but they need to be done right." Sophia picked up the pen with a hand that shook and transcribed. Lucas froze the image. The papers she was copying, he couldn't see them clearly, but his instinct screamed forgery. Care records, medication logs, the documentation that would prove whatever treatment plan they were following was legitimate, doctor-ordered, properly administered. The following night, more footage. Sophia arrives at Lydia's study after her care shift, slipping in through the door like a shadow, emerging 30 minutes later with an envelope, bulky, clearly full of cash. Lucas tracked her the next day, using the skills he'd learned during his undercover work, and watched her deposit money into an account that his later research revealed was tied to Mateo's medical clinic. $1,000, $2,000, $3,000 over the course of 2 weeks. On the surface, it looked exactly like what it was, a desperate woman selling her cooperation for cash. What Lucas didn't see, what his cameras couldn't catch, was the context. The insurance fraud file Victor kept as leverage. The way Sophia's hands trembled every time she signed something. The moments when she was alone in the patriarch's room, whispering apologies to the unconscious man, telling him she was trying to find a way out. What Lucas didn't see was Sophia carefully copying a few of the most damning documents she signed. The ones that altered medication dosages to dangerous levels. The ones that authorized experimental drugs with terrible side effects. And hiding them in the laundry room beneath a loose floorboard, planning to somehow anonymously tip off authorities if she could find a way that didn't lead back to her. What Lucas saw was betrayal. He watched her on screens in a dozen variations, Sophia signing papers, Sophia accepting cash, Sophia leaving his father's room while Victor smiled and patted her shoulder. He watched and felt the fragile faith he'd built in her, the belief that there was still goodness in this broken house, crumbled like burned paper. She's one of them, he told himself. She was forced out, then bought back. It was theater, and I was the fool who believed she was different. His lawyer Gregory, reviewing the footage during one of their clandestine meetings, was more circumspect. It could be coercion, he said. They might have something on her. Or she's just corrupt, Lucas said bitterly. Poor doesn't mean honest. Maybe she saw an opportunity. That doesn't sound like the woman who took care of your father and Emma. People change when you offer them enough money. But Gregory was looking at something else on the screen, frowning. Lucas, look at this. He rewound to a clip of Victor and Lydia in the study, deep in conversation when they thought everyone had left. The camera had no audio, but Gregory was good at reading lips. He's saying something about pills. Switching them, Lucas leaned in. Lydia was holding a bottle of medication, comparing it to another. Victor nodded, said something short. Lydia smiled, a razor blade of satisfaction, and placed one bottle in her desk drawer, the other in her purse. They're tampering with his medicine, Lucas breathed, and using Sophia's signature on the logs to cover it. Gregory met his eyes. Which means when he dies or deteriorates, she'll be the scapegoat. They're building a paper trail that leads to her, not them. Lucas wanted to believe it, wanted to believe Sophia was a victim rather than a collaborator. But the footage of her accepting those envelopes of cash, the way she'd returned so quickly after her public exile, kept overriding his hope with cynicism. We'll bring them all down, he said. Sophia, Victor, Lydia, everyone involved. And if she's innocent, then she should have said no. The words tasted like ash even as he spoke them, but he clung to them. He couldn't afford to be soft. Not when his father's life hung in the balance. Not when justice required absolute clarity. He told himself he was being rational. He told himself betrayal was betrayal, even if it came wrapped in desperation. But late at night, watching old footage of Sophia reading to his father, her voice gentle and her hand on the old man's forehead checking for fever, Lucas felt something break inside him that all his money and power couldn't fix. He'd fallen in love with her, and now he hated her, and he didn't know which feeling was the lie. Meanwhile, in a different part of the mansion, Emma was conducting her own investigation with the fearless logic of a child who hadn't yet learned that some truths were dangerous. She'd noticed the patterns. Victor always visited her father's room late at night, always with Lydia, always sending the nurse away on some errand. She'd noticed how her father, who'd been stable if unconscious, seemed to be getting worse, his breathing more labored, his color grayer, his rare moments of semi-consciousness shorter and more confused. And she'd noticed Sophia's fear. Emma had loved Sophia from the beginning, with the uncomplicated devotion of a child who'd found someone who actually listened. When Lydia had forced Sophia out, Emma had mourned like a wound. When she returned, Emma was overjoyed until she saw the change. Sophia was jumpy now, sad. She smiled at Emma, but the smile didn't reach her eyes, and when Victor appeared, Sophia flinched like she'd been hit. Emma knew abuse when she saw it. She'd lived with Lydia long enough, so she started spying. Children are good at being invisible. Adults so rarely look down. She crept through hallways in socks, hid behind curtains, pressed her ear to doors that should have been locked. And one night she heard them. The dosage increase should do it, Victor was saying. Combined with the medication switch, his system will shut down within 2 weeks. Organ failure, entirely consistent with his existing condition. No one will question it, and the caregiver's notes will show she was following the prescribed treatment. Lydia's voice, her handwriting on every page. If anyone investigates, they'll find Sophia Reyes administered exactly what killed him, whether she understood what she was doing or not. Perfect. And the girl, Emma, a pause. She's been quiet lately, too quiet. We should consider boarding school after the funeral, somewhere far away, very structured. Agreed. She's always been too attached to the staff, inappropriate relationships. She'll be better off in Switzerland, where they teach proper behavior. Emma's hands, pressed against the wall, had gone numb. They were going to kill her father. They were going to blame Sophia. And then they were going to send Emma away where she couldn't tell anyone the truth. She remembered what Luca, the janitor, but she was pretty sure now he was more than that, had shown her weeks ago, in a kind moment when he'd helped her set up an old tablet he'd found in the storage room. If you ever need to remember something important, you can use the voice recorder, he'd said. It saves everything. Emma still had that tablet, and now, crouched outside her father's door while Victor and Lydia planned murder, she pulled it from her pajama pocket with shaking hands, opened the recording app, and held it as close as she dared to the crack beneath the door. The final transfer tomorrow night during the gala, Victor was saying, 15 million to the Cayman account, disguised as a donation to the medical foundation. By the time anyone notices, we'll have covered our tracks with Sophia's documentation. And you're certain the evidence points to her? Every signature, every log entry, every medication note. If they dig, they'll find a desperate woman with a criminal history of insurance fraud, a sick brother, and a perfect motive to accept money for helping a rich old man die a little faster to collect. She's the perfect fall guy. Lydia laughed, a sound like breaking glass. Who knew the help could be so useful? Emma recorded it all. When their voices moved away from the door, she fled back to her room on legs that barely held her, clutched her tablet like a grenade, and realized she had no idea what to do with it. Call the police. She was 11. Would they believe her? And if Lydia found out before anything could be done, what would happen? Tell someone in the house. All the staff were terrified of Lydia and Victor. Even Mrs. Dalton, who Emma disliked, seemed trapped in her own fear. Then Emma remembered Luca, the janitor who'd stood up for Sophia, the janitor who'd given her this tablet, the janitor who sometimes watched her father's room with an expression that wasn't like staff at all. It was personal, protective. She had to find Luca. She had to give him the recording before it was too late. The night of the gala arrived like a beautiful threat, the mansion draped in lights and flowers, transforming into the stage for what Lydia had announced as the pinnacle of her social ascension. The launch of the Morty Medical Trust, a charitable foundation that would honor her husband's legacy while conveniently funneling millions through accounts she and Victor controlled. Lucas, watching preparations from his janitor's post, felt the trap closing. Gregory had confirmed the financial setup. A massive transfer was scheduled for tonight, timed to coincide with the gala when security and attention would be focused on guests rather than the back-end money movement. Lucas had arranged for police and financial investigators to be waiting at a nearby location, ready to move when he gave the signal. He'd loaded all his evidence onto a USB drive, bank records, security footage, medical documentation, and yes, those damning clips of Sophia in Lydia's study accepting cash and signing papers. Tonight would end it. Tonight his father would be safe, the villains would fall, and Lucas could finally stop being invisible. He just wished he felt triumph instead of this gnawing emptiness where his hope used to be. An hour before guests arrived, Emma found him in the maintenance room, out of breath and wide-eyed. "Luca, I need to show you something." "Emma, not now." Lucas was coordinating with Gregory via text, confirming positions and timing. "The gala is starting soon and I have to. They're going to kill my father," the girl's voice cracked. "Tonight or soon, and they're going to blame Sophia, and I recorded them saying it. Please, you have to listen." She shoved a tablet into his hands, but before Lucas could react, Mrs. Dalton's voice echoed from the hallway. "Emma, your stepmother wants you dressed and ready in 15 minutes. Now." Emma's face went pale. "Please," she whispered to Lucas, "please listen to it. It proves everything." Then she was gone, summoned to play her role in the performance. Lucas looked at the tablet, old, cracked screen, probably salvaged from somewhere, and felt a spike of impatience. He didn't have time for a child's evidence, not when he had a coordinated operation about to launch. He pocketed the tablet, intending to check it later if he remembered, and returned to his final preparations. He didn't know that the recording Emma had risked everything to capture would have changed his entire understanding of Sophia's innocence. He didn't know that his refusal to listen at that moment would nearly cost Sophia her life. The gala began with champagne and cruelty disguised as elegance. Lydia held court in a gown that cost more than Sophia's annual salary, greeting board members and society pages, while Victor worked the room with his calculator smile, securing support for the foundation that would be their ultimate cover for theft. Lucas, relegated to janitorial duties in the background, watched and waited. Sophia had been ordered into a server's uniform, another humiliation, pulling her from care work into service work, and he tracked her movements as she carried trays and kept her head down, trying to be invisible. At 9 p.m., the patriarch was wheeled into the ballroom, a ghastly centerpiece in his hospital wheelchair. He looked worse than ever, skin like paper, breathing assisted by a visible oxygen tank, eyes closed and face slack. Gasps rippled through the guests, the theatrical pity of people who were relieved it wasn't them. "My husband wanted to be here tonight," Lydia announced, her voice carrying over the shocked whispers. "To see the foundation that will continue his life's work in medicine and charity. Though he cannot speak, I know he blesses this endeavor." Victor, standing beside the patriarch, held up a leather folder. "And with the new power of attorney granted just this week, Lydia will ensure his vision lives on in perpetuity." Lucas felt his phone buzz. "Gregory, financial investigators in position. Police ready at your signal. Good luck." This was it. The moment to step forward, reveal himself, play the evidence that would destroy Lydia and Victor publicly, irrevocably. But then he saw Victor move close to Sophia, say something low and threatening. Saw Sophia's hand shake as she picked up a tray with the patriarch's medication cup, specially mixed for the gala, Victor had announced, with supplements the doctor ordered. Lucas watched Sophia carry that cup to the patriarch. I watched her hand it to the nurse with instructions. I watched the nurse place it on the old man's lips. And in that moment, every piece of evidence Lucas had compiled, the footage of Sophia signing documents, the cash payments, her return to the household despite her abuse, clicked into place with terrible clarity. She was part of it, she had to be. Why else would Victor trust her to administer what Lucas suddenly, horribly suspected was poison? The The patriarch drank. 2 minutes passed. 3. Then the old man's body spasmed. His breathing went ragged, harsh, the oxygen tank suddenly inadequate. Foam gathered at his lips. His eyes rolled back. Someone screamed. The doctor pushed through the crowd. And Lydia, magnificent in her timing, whirled on Sophia with accusatory fury. She poisoned him. That woman poisoned my husband. Security moved instantly. Sophia's tray crashed to the floor as they grabbed her arms, her face a mask of shock and terror. No, I didn't. I gave him what the nurse gave me, what Victor ordered. She's lying. Victor's voice, loud and clear. I gave her nothing. She must have tampered with his medication. The ballroom erupted in chaos. Guests backed away from Sophia like she carried plague. Emma was sobbing, trying to reach her father, while a guard held her back. The doctor was barking orders, working on the patriarch, while people shouted contradictions and accusations. And Lucas stood paralyzed, torn between his meticulously planned revelation and the sudden, sickening uncertainty that he might have gotten everything wrong. He watched Sophia being dragged toward the exit, pleading her innocence. He saw her eyes sweep the crowd, desperate for anyone to defend her, and for one terrible second her gaze locked with his. She didn't recognize him, still saw just a janitor in the background. But he recognized the look in her eyes. He'd seen it before, in a photograph his mother kept, taken during the months before she died, when his father's first wife had accused her of affairs and gold digging. The look of someone who'd been set up, who knew the truth but couldn't prove it, who was watching their entire life burn on a foundation of lies. Lucas reached into his pocket, felt the USB drive that would destroy everyone. Felt beneath it the tablet Emma had given him, still unheard. The room seemed to slow. He could step forward now as himself with his partial evidence. But if he was wrong about Sophia, if she really was a victim and not an accomplice, then his footage would help convict an innocent woman. Or he could wait, listen to Emma's recording, understand the full truth. But the patriarch was dying now. Justice couldn't wait. Lucas made his choice. He walked away from the ballroom into the quieter hallway, pulled out the tablet, and pressed play on Emma's recording. Victor's voice emerged. The dosage increase should do it. Combined with the medication switch, his system will shut down within 2 weeks, Lydia, and the caregiver's notes will show she was following prescribed treatment. Victor, her handwriting on every page. If anyone investigates, they'll find that Sophia Reyes administered exactly what killed him. The recording continued, laying out the entire conspiracy, the blackmail, the insurance fraud leverage, the plan to frame Sophia with her own desperate cooperation. Lucas stood in the empty hallway, listening to his father's would-be killer's plan murder, and felt the ground dissolve beneath him. Sophia wasn't the enemy, she was the scapegoat, and he'd been about to feed her to the wolves. Behind him, the chaos in the ballroom crescendoed. Ahead of him, the choice crystallized with brutal clarity. He could slink back to his investigation, build a more perfect case, protect himself and his disguise. Or he could stop being invisible and fight. Lucas Morty straightened his janitor's uniform, gripped the tablet and USB drive, and walked back into the ballroom where his father was dying and the woman he'd misjudged was being destroyed. It was time to burn down the lie. Lucas shoved through the crowd with the kind of authority that made people instinctively move aside, even though he wore a janitor's clothes. Stop! His voice cut through the pandemonium. Everyone stop! The security guards holding Sophia paused. Lydia turned, irritation flashing across her elegant features. Victor's eyes narrowed with the calculation of a predator sensing threat. "What do you think you're doing?" Mrs. Dalton hissed, moving to intercept. "Staff are not permitted. Let him go," Lucas said to the guards, and the command in his voice, the unconscious expectation of being obeyed, made them hesitate just long enough for him to reach the center of the ballroom, to stand between Sophia and her accusers. He turned to face the crowd, the cameras, the investigators he knew were watching from nearby, and he ripped off his name badge, that cheap plastic thing that said LUKA/maintenance, and let it fall. "My name," he said clearly, "is Lucas Morty. That man dying over there is my father, and I've spent the last 2 months working in this house, disguised as a janitor, because I came home to find him in a coma and my stepmother looting his company." The silence was absolute. Lydia went white, then red. "This is absurd. Lucas is in Africa. I was in Africa. I came back when my father's lawyer told me something was wrong, and he was right." Lucas held up the USB drive. "I have security footage, bank records, documentation of shell companies and illegal transfers. Evidence of systematic theft orchestrated by Lydia Morty and Victor Chen." "You're lying." Victor stepped forward, but his voice had lost its confidence. "Even if you are Lucas, which I doubt, you have nothing. Just a disgruntled son's paranoid fantasies. Then let's watch together." Lucas turned to one of the gala staff. "Get a screen, project this. Now." The staff, utterly confused but sensing drama, scrambled to connect Lucas's USB to the ballroom's projection system. Within moments, footage bloomed across the white wall, Lydia and Victor in her study, counting cash. Victor accessing bank accounts and transferring funds. Lydia with medication bottles, clearly swapping contents. Gasps, murmurs. The beginning of belief. Those are manipulated images, deepfakes. Lydia's composure was cracking. "He's trying to steal his father's company." "Then explain this." Lucas held up Emma's tablet, and this time when he pressed play, the little device's speaker carried Victor's voice to every corner of the room. "The dosage increase should do it. His system will shut down within 2 weeks. Sophia Reyes administered exactly what killed him." The crowd's murmur became a wave. Board members pulled out phones. The doctor, still working on the patriarch, looked up with horror dawning on his face. And Sophia, held between two guards, swayed as though the weight of vindication and trauma had simultaneously hit her. "That's taken out of context," Victor was shouting now. "I was discussing theoretical scenarios. Were you theoretically blackmailing Sophia with her brother's medical care?" Lucas turned to Sophia, and his voice gentled. "I know about the insurance fraud accusation he held over you. I know he threatened to destroy Mateo's coverage unless you cooperated. And I know," his voice cracked, "I know I was wrong about you. I saw you signing papers and taking cash, and I thought you were part of this, and I'm sorry. I am so sorry." Sophia stared at him, recognition finally dawning. You were the janitor. You were watching the whole time. I was blind the whole time, but I'm seeing it now. This is ridiculous." Lydia moved toward the exit. "I don't have to listen to this slander." The doors opened. Not for Lydia's escape, but for the arrival of police officers and plainclothes investigators, led by Gregory Chen, who'd been waiting for Lucas's signal and had finally received it via his panicked texts from the hallway. "Mrs. Morty, Mr. Chen." The lead detective's voice was professionally neutral. "We have warrants for your arrest on suspicion of elder abuse, fraud, and attempted murder. You have the right to remain silent." The ballroom erupted. Guests pulled out phones to record, to call their own lawyers, to distance themselves from the scandal. Board members huddled, already calculating damage control. And Lydia and Victor, cornered at last, reacted in the way of people whose elaborate performance had just been ripped away. Lydia lunged toward Lucas with a scream of pure rage, nails out like claws. "You ungrateful little bastard. After everything I did to secure this family's future." Security caught her. Victor tried to run and made it 3 steps before 2 officers took him down. He fought, shouting that they were all conspiring against him, that Sophia was the criminal, that he had documentation. "The documentation you forged using Sophia's handwriting." Lucas cut across him. "The care logs that show her administering the poisoned medications you were swapping. We have footage of you tampering with the bottles. We have the financial trail showing you paid her as a coerced accomplice, not a partner. We have the insurance fraud file you used as blackmail, which makes every signature she gave you extracted under duress." He turned to the detective. "Sophia Reyes is a victim here, not a perpetrator. Victor blackmailed her with her brother's life. Everything she did because she had no choice." The detective nodded slowly. "We'll need to interview everyone, but Mr. Morty, the recording and your testimony give us a strong foundation. Miss Reyes will need your statement, but you're not under arrest." The guards released Sophia's arms. She stumbled, and Lucas caught her without thinking, steadying her as the woman who'd been his father's killer a moment ago transformed back into what she'd always been. Someone trying to save everyone but herself. I documented everything I could, Sophia whispered, her voice shaking. I hid papers in the laundry room under the floorboard. I was going to send them to the police anonymously, but I was so scared they'd trace it to me, that Matteo would lose his coverage, that I'd go to prison and he'd have no one. You don't have to explain. Lucas's voice was rough. You were surviving, I understand that now. Do you? She pulled back to look at him, her eyes red but fierce. Because you thought I was guilty. You watched me for weeks and thought I was a murderer. I thought you were guilty because I wanted to believe the world was simple. Good people and bad people, clear lines, but you, he struggled for words. You were in an impossible situation and you were trying to protect someone you loved. That's not guilt. That's just human. Behind them, the doctor called out. He's stabilizing. Someone finds out what drugs were given. I need to know what I'm counteracting. Sophia broke from Lucas and ran to the patriarch's side, kneeling by the wheelchair. The cup he drank from, it was prepared by Victor, given to me by the nurse. I didn't touch it. But 2 days ago, I saw Victor with bottles labeled digoxin and potassium, swapping them with the regular medications. If he overdosed those, that would cause exactly these symptoms. The doctor was already adjusting treatment, barking orders to paramedics who'd arrived with police. Get him to the hospital now. And someone secure those medication bottles as evidence. The patriarch was wheeled out at speed, and Emma, who'd been crying silently in a corner, broke free from her handler and threw herself at Sophia, then Lucas, then both together. You saved him, she sobbed. You both saved him. I tried to tell you, Lucas. I tried to give you the recording earlier. I know, and you did tell me just in time. Lucas crouched to Emma's level. You were braver than any of us, Pequena. Don't send me away. They were going to send me to boarding school where I couldn't tell anyone. You're not going anywhere, Lucas promised. You're staying home where you belong. The gala, meant to be Lydia's triumph, ended in handcuffs and sirens. The guests dispersed with the scandalized thrill of people who'd witnessed history. The investigators began their methodical cataloging of evidence. Sophia's hidden documents from the laundry room, Victor's laptop files, the medication bottles with their damning contents. And Lucas stood in the center of his family's ballroom, still wearing a janitor's uniform, with a traumatized child clinging to one hand and a woman he'd wronged standing careful inches away, and felt the crushing weight of what almost happened. I need to see my brother, Sophia said suddenly. I need to make sure he's okay. With Victor arrested, I don't know if the medical coverage is still. It's handled, Lucas interrupted. I'll pay for everything. His coverage, his treatments, anything he needs. It's the least. He stopped. No, it's not a payment or an apology. It's what should have been happening all along. No one should be blackmailed into cooperating because they can't afford to keep their family alive. Sophia studied him for a long moment. You disguised yourself as a janitor in your own home. Why? Because I thought I couldn't get the truth any other way. And now that you have it, Lucas looked around the ballroom, the shattered facade of wealth, the evidence markers where moments ago there'd been champagne. Now I have to decide what to do with my father's company, with this family, with a system that let Lydia and Victor do this in the first place. He met her eyes, and I have to figure out how to apologize to someone who deserved my trust and got my suspicion instead. You can start, Sophia said quietly, by making sure this never happens to anyone else. Other caregivers, other desperate staff, other people who love someone enough to make terrible choices. I will, then we'll talk, after I see Matteo, after things settle, after I figure out if I can ever feel safe in this house again. She walked away, escorted by an officer who'd take her statement, and Lucas let her go. Some things couldn't be fixed with apologies or money. Some things took time and proof and the slow rebuilding of trust. But he would start. Tonight, tomorrow, every day after. Behind him, Gregory approached, wearing the satisfied expression of a lawyer who just won the biggest case of his career. That was dramatic. That was necessary. The board's going to have questions. The media's going to explode. You're about to become very visible, very fast. Lucas thought about invisibility, about the weeks he'd spent as Luca, overlooked and underestimated, seeing the architecture of cruelty that held up the mansion's beauty. Good. Let them look. Maybe it's time this family stopped hiding. The trial of Lydia Morty and Victor Chen dominated headlines for months. Attempted murder, elder abuse, fraud, embezzlement. The charges multiplied as investigators peeled back layers of deception. The recordings, the footage, Sophia's testimony about blackmail, and the hidden documents she'd risked everything to preserve built an unassailable case. Lydia received 18 years. Victor, as the architect of the scheme, received 25. In their sentencing hearing, the judge's words were unsparing. You exploited the vulnerabilities of those weaker than you, a sick man, a desperate young woman, a child, and you did it while wrapped in the trappings of sophistication and charity. You are precisely the kind of evil that hides behind respectability. Lucas attended every hearing. So did Sophia, though it cost her sleep and sanity to face the people who'd tried to destroy her. And when it was finally over, when the courtroom doors closed on Lydia's last appeal, Lucas found Sophia on the courthouse steps, staring at the city below. "It's done," he said. "Is it?" She didn't look at him. "They're in prison, but I still wake up at night thinking Victor's at my door with another folder. I still can't sign my name without remembering how they used it. I'm sorry, I know." She finally turned, and her eyes were older than they should have been. "I know you are, and I know you saved my life that night, even though you also doubted me. I'm trying to figure out how to hold both those things. Take all the time you need." Weeks passed. The patriarch, whose name was Thomas, though he'd been the patriarch for so long even his family forgot to use it, woke from his coma in a real hospital, surrounded by real doctors who were horrified by what they found in his system. Recovery was slow, painful, but he was alive and increasingly aware. His first clear question when Lucas visited was, "Where's Sophia? She doesn't work here anymore, Dad." "Not work. I want to thank her." The old man's voice was papery but firm, and Emma told me what happened. "That girl saved me, you saved me, and I slept through all of it like a fool. You were poisoned. I was negligent before that. I married Lydia without seeing who she was. I let my company become a target because I cared more about deals than people. Thomas struggled to sit up. I want to do better. Whatever time I have left." So together, slowly, they began rebuilding. Lucas restructured Morty Holdings with stringent oversight and transparency. He established an independent ethics board. He raised wages for staff, created real contracts with protections, and funded a support system for employees facing medical debt or family emergencies. "So no one else gets blackmailed into being a criminal," he explained to a skeptical board. He also liquidated several of his father's vanity assets: the third yacht, the vacation homes in places they never visited, the art collection worth more than a hospital, and established a legitimate charitable foundation. Not the fake one Lydia had planned, but a real trust managed by people who actually cared about healthcare access and workers' rights. And he asked Sophia to help lead it. "I'm not qualified," she protested when he made the offer over coffee at Miss Rosa's street cart, neutral ground, away from the mansion's ghosts. "You're more qualified than anyone. You lived the problem we are trying to solve. You know what it's like when the system tells you to choose between your morals and your family. I chose family, which makes you human. Sophia, I'm not asking you to forgive me or even like me. I'm asking you to use your story, the parts you're willing to share, to help other people in the same trap." She stirred her coffee for a long time. "If I do this, I won't pretend everything's fine. I won't smile at your press releases and play the grateful poor girl. I don't want you to. And Matteo gets full coverage, long-term, no strings, not as payment but as a right." Already done, Gregory set up a trust. Medical, education, housing, he's covered. Sophia looked at him with those eyes that had seen too much. "Why do you care?" "Because I watched you be destroyed by people with power, and I was almost one of them. I don't want to be that person. And because..." He stopped, then decided honesty was the only currency that mattered. "Because I fell in love with you when I thought you were just a good person trying to survive, and then I believed you were corrupt, and now I know you were both good and compromised and fighting anyway." And that's the most human thing I've ever seen. Love, Sophia repeated, tasting the word. You don't have to reciprocate. I'm not asking for that. I'm just telling you the truth. She set down her coffee. The truth is I don't know what I feel except exhausted and angry and grateful and scared. But I'll take the job. Not for you, for people like me. That's all I'm asking. The foundation became her domain. She hired carefully, built programs thoughtfully, and spoke at events with a raw honesty that made society pages uncomfortable and actual people weep with recognition. She told her story, the blackmail, the impossible choices, the way poverty became a weapon against her, and she refused to soften it. And slowly, grudgingly, she let Lucas back into her orbit, not as an employer, not as a savior, but as someone who'd been wrong and was trying to do better. They worked together. They fought, bitterly sometimes, when Lucas's privileged assumptions collided with Sophia's lived experience. They learned each other's boundaries and triggers. And gradually, in the months after the trial, something like partnership emerged. Meanwhile, the mansion itself transformed. Thomas, recovered enough to spend hours in his garden, insisted on opening the grounds one weekend a month to the community, picnics and concerts and free healthcare fairs, tearing down the walls that had made the estate a fortress. Emma thrived. She started a blog about her experience, became a surprisingly eloquent advocate for children in abusive households, and decided she wanted to be a lawyer like Gregory. She also adopted Sophia unofficially, spending weekends with her and Matteo, building a chosen family that didn't depend on blood or contracts. And late one evening, 6 months after the gala, Sophia found Lucas in his father's study, formerly Lydia's domain, now stripped of its cold elegance and filled with books and warmth. Emma wants to know if you'll come to Matteo's birthday party, she said from the doorway. Of course. Lucas looked up from the grant applications he was reviewing. Do I need to bring anything? Just yourself, she hesitated. She also asked if I'm going to forgive you eventually. What did you tell her? I told her forgiveness isn't a switch, it's a process, and I'm working on it. Sophia stepped into the room, the space where she'd once stood terrified while Victor handed her blood money. But I also told her you've earned the chance to keep trying. Lucas set down his pen. That's more than I deserve. Maybe, but here's the thing about people who have been where I've been, we learn to recognize real change versus performance. And you, Lucas Morty, you're actually changing. The company, the foundation, the way you listen when I tell you you're wrong. It's real, I'm trying. I know. She crossed to his desk, looked at the applications, requests from workers facing medical debt, from families trapped by circumstance, from people who needed someone to see them as human instead of expendable. This is good work. It's your work. I'm just funding it. It's our work. Sophia met his eyes, and maybe, eventually, it could be more than work. The hope that bloomed in Lucas's chest was fragile, tentative. Maury, I'm not promising anything, but I'm not saying never either. Ask me again in a year when I've had time to figure out who I am outside of survival mode. I can wait. Good. Sophia smiled, a real smile, not the careful mask she'd worn for so long. Because I'm worth waiting for. I know. She left him there, and Lucas returned to his work with a lightness he hadn't felt in months, maybe years. The foundations of his life had been shattered and rebuilt, and the new version was smaller, less polished, but infinitely more true. Outside, evening light washed over the Morty estate, turning the harsh edges golden. The gates stood open, as they did most days now. The fountain laughed with its dolphins restored. And in the garden, Thomas sat with Emma, teaching her about roses while telling her stories about her grandmother, Lucas's mother, who'd loved these same flowers. Inside, Sophia worked in the foundation's office, fielding calls from people who needed help and finding ways to give it. Matteo, healthy and hopeful, studied in the library with tutors Lucas had hired. Gregory negotiated new partnerships with hospitals and insurance companies, forcing accountability into systems that preferred shadows. And Lucas sat in his father's study, reviewing applications, signing checks, and building something that felt like redemption. The work wasn't finished. The world was still unjust, still full of people like Lydia and Victor who saw others as tools. But here, in this house that had been a monument to cruelty and secrets, There was light now. There was truth. There was a family being rebuilt not on blood and money, but on the harder foundations of honesty, second chances, and the belief that everyone deserved dignity. In the end, the real wealth wasn't measured in the Morty fortune, though Lucas used that fortune better than his father ever had. The real wealth was measured in smaller currencies: Emma's laughter, free of fear; Sophia's smile, earned and genuine; Matteo's breath, steady and strong; Thomas's second chance to be the father and grandfather he'd failed to be before; and Lucas's transformation from the invisible janitor to the visible man, someone who'd learned that power meant nothing if you didn't use it to protect the vulnerable, that privilege was a responsibility, and that seeing the truth required looking at the people you'd been taught to overlook. One evening, a year almost to the day after the gala, Sophia found Lucas in that same study. He looked up, and something in her expression made him stand. "Emma's asking again," she said, "whether I've forgiven you." And Sophia crossed the room, took his hands, and held them with a grip that was both gentle and unbreakable. "I told her I have. And I told her I'm ready to see what comes next." "What comes next?" Lucas echoed, hope and fear balanced on a knife's edge. "We build something new, not employer and employee, not savior and saved. Just two people who went through hell and came out the other side, trying to make sure fewer people have to make that journey." She paused. "And maybe, along the way, we figure out if love looks different when it's built on truth instead of secrets." Lucas, the man who disguised himself to uncover lies and nearly became one himself, felt something settle into place. "I'd like that." "Good," Sophia said, "because you're still worth the effort." They stood together in the warm light of the study, while outside the mansion, no longer a fortress, no longer a prison, opened its doors to the evening and the city beyond. Emma was singing somewhere in the halls. Thomas was laughing at something on his tablet. Matteo called out a question about homework, and Sophia called back an answer. It wasn't a fairy tale. There was no magic solution, no perfect ending. But it was real and hard-earned, and built on the understanding that justice wasn't a single dramatic moment, but a choice you made every day, to see people, to value them, to fight for them even when the cost was high. And in a world that often felt like it rewarded cruelty, this small corner of truth and second chances felt like a revolution. If there's anything this story teaches us, it's that truth has a voice that can't be silenced forever, no matter how powerful the lie. What would you have done in Sophia's place? Signed the papers to save your family, or refused and faced the consequences? Drop your thoughts in the comments below. And if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe. We've got more tales of justice, betrayal, and redemption coming your way.